Welcome to the Story Corner, where we uncover tales that blur the lines between fact and fiction. Today, we're diving into an extraordinary true story that will leave you questioning the very nature of identity. In 1957, Lawrence Bader, a struggling cookware salesman from Akron, Ohio, vanished during a fishing trip on Lake Erie. His family mourned, life insurance was paid out, and the world moved on. But 8 years later, a chance encounter in Chicago would unravel a mystery that defies belief. Who was the charismatic TV personality and skilled archer known as Fritz in Omaha, Nebraska? And why did he bear an uncanny resemblance to the long-lost Lawrence Bader? Join us in the Story Corner as we explore the man who vanished, the Lawrence Bader story. We'll unravel a tale of disappearance, reinvention, and the astonishing capacity of the human spirit to create a new life. Was it a case of amnesia or a meticulously planned escape? Prepare to question everything you thought you knew about identity and second chances. Settle in, dear listeners, for a story that proves truth is often stranger than fiction. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell to catch more incredible tales from the Story Corner. Now let's begin our journey into the extraordinary life of Lawrence Bader.
The Man Who Vanished, the Lawrence Bader Story. Chapter 1. A Life Under Pressure. Lawrence Bader stared out the window of his modest home in Akron, Ohio, watching the gray clouds gather overhead. The air felt heavy with the promise of rain, matching the weight that had settled on his shoulders in recent months. As a struggling cookware salesman, he was barely keeping his family afloat, with mounting debts and dwindling prospects chipping away at his confidence. Turning away from the window, Lawrence made his way to the kitchen, where his wife Mary Lou was preparing dinner. She looked up at him, her brow creased with concern. "How did the sales call go today, dear?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Lawrence sank into a chair, letting out a heavy sigh. "Not good, I'm afraid. Mr. Mathers said he's not renewing his order." He ran a hand through his thinning hair, frustration etching lines on his face. "I'm running out of options, Mary Lou. I just don't know how much longer we can keep this up." Mary Lou set down the knife she was using and moved to stand beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure something out, Lawrence. We always have." Her eyes conveyed a mix of determination and empathy, but he could see the strain beneath the surface. The Bader children, ranging from 8 to 14 years old, had gathered in the living room, their laughter and chatter a stark contrast to the somber mood in the kitchen. Lawrence watched them, feeling a twinge of guilt for the burden he was placing on his family. "Maybe I should try to find a different job," he murmured, his gaze drifting back to Mary Lou. "Something more stable, with a steady paycheck. I can't keep putting us through this uncertainty." Mary Lou squeezed his shoulder, her expression softening. "Whatever you decide, I'm here with you. We'll get through this, together." Lawrence nodded, his mind already whirring with thoughts of potential new opportunities. As the aroma of dinner filled the air, he couldn't help but feel that this could be the last calm before a storm. Chapter 2. The Last Normal Day. The next morning, Lawrence Bader rose early, determined to make the most of his day. He had decided to take a break from his sales calls and instead spend the day fishing on Lake Erie, a respite he had been longing for. Stepping outside, he breathed in the crisp spring air, savoring the momentary escape from his worries. After a quick breakfast with his family, Lawrence bid them farewell, kissing Mary Lou and ruffling the children's hair. "I'll be back before dinner," he promised, a rare smile crossing his lips. "Wish me luck." As he drove to the Perkins Beach boat rental in Rocky River, Lawrence felt a sense of anticipation. The last time he had been out on the lake was years ago, before the financial pressures had started to weigh him down. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt this level of excitement and freedom. At the rental dock, Lawrence greeted the attendant, a friendly young man who had known him from previous trips. "Heading out today, Mr. Bader?" the attendant asked, handing over the keys to a small, well-maintained motorboat. "That's right. Lawrence replied, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. "Just need a little time to myself, you know?" He winked conspiratorially, earning a chuckle from the attendant. With a quick check of the boat's condition, Lawrence untied the mooring line and carefully maneuvered the craft out onto the sparkling waters of Lake Erie. As he powered the engine and felt the boat glide across the waves, a sense of peace washed over him. For the first time in months, he felt the weight of his worries begin to lift. Cutting the engine, Lawrence allowed the boat to drift, casting his line and settling back to enjoy the tranquility of the moment. The sun was high in the sky, its warm rays filtering through the gentle waves. Lawrence closed his eyes, savoring the salty breeze and the gentle lapping of the water against the hull. In this serene setting, he allowed his mind to wander, contemplating his options and the possibility of a fresh start. Perhaps he could find a more stable job, one that would provide the security his family needed. Or maybe he could explore a different sales avenue, something that would better suit his skills and passions. As the afternoon wore on, Lawrence seemed oblivious to the ominous clouds gathering on the horizon. The calm before the storm was about to come to a crashing end. Chapter 3. Lost in the Storm. Lawrence Bader had been out on the lake for several hours, his line untouched and his mind lost in thought, when the first stirrings of the approaching storm reached him. A sudden gust of wind ruffled the surface of the water, causing the boat to rock gently. Shielding his eyes against the glare of the sun, Lawrence scanned the horizon, his brow furrowing as he noticed the dark clouds gathering in the distance. The peaceful tranquility he had been savoring just moments ago was quickly giving way to a sense of unease. Reaching for the ignition, Lawrence turned the key, only to be met with a sputtering sound. Panic rose in his chest as he tried again, the engine refusing to start. He had been so lost in his own thoughts that he had neglected to check the fuel level. And now he was adrift, with a brewing storm rapidly closing in. The wind picked up, whipping the waves into a frothing frenzy. Lawrence gripped the sides of the boat, his knuckles turning white as he stared helplessly at the approaching tempest. He needed to get back to shore, but without a working engine, he was at the mercy of the lake's unpredictable nature. As the first heavy raindrops began to fall, Lawrence's mind raced, searching for a solution. He scanned the horizon, hoping to spot another boat or the distant shoreline, but the storm had shrouded everything in a veil of gray. Thunder rumbled ominously, and the waves grew increasingly turbulent, crashing against the sides of the boat and sending icy sprays of water over the bow. Lawrence hunched down, trying to shield himself from the elements, his heart pounding in his chest. In the chaos of the storm, Lawrence Bader's boat was tossed about, spinning and drifting, until finally, a particularly massive wave struck the hull, splintering the fiberglass and sending the hapless fisherman into the churning waters of Lake Erie. Chapter 4. Aftermath and Grief. The storm had passed, and the waters of Lake Erie had once again calmed to a glassy surface. But the Bader family's world had been irrevocably shattered. Mary Lou stood on the shore, surrounded by a group of somber-faced neighbors, her eyes red from endless tears. The Coast Guard had scoured the area, searching tirelessly for any sign of Lawrence Bader or his boat. But as the hours turned into days, hope began to fade. The damaged and empty vessel had been the only tangible evidence of his disappearance, leaving Mary Lou and her 3 children in a state of agonizing uncertainty. "They can't just give up," Mary Lou pleaded, her voice trembling as she addressed the Coast Guard officers. "My husband is out there somewhere, you have to keep looking." The officers offered words of sympathy, but their expressions betrayed the grim reality that Lawrence Bader had most likely perished in the violent storm. With a heavy heart, they explained that the search would be suspended, at least for the time being. As the days turned into weeks, Mary Lou's initial desperation gave way to a deep, soul-crushing grief. She had lost her husband, the provider and rock of their family, leaving her to shoulder the burden of raising their children alone. The once vibrant home on Maple Street now felt hollow, filled with the echoes of laughter and memories that would forever remain unfinished. The Bader children, too, grappled with the sudden absence of their father. The oldest, a 14-year-old boy, tried to put on a brave face, while the younger 2, a girl of 12 and a boy of 8, struggled to understand the finality of their loss. At night, Mary Lou could hear the muffled sounds of their tears, a constant reminder of the ache that permeated their lives. As the months passed, the community of Akron rallied around the Bader family, providing meals, emotional support, and financial assistance where they could. But no amount of kindness could fill the void left by Lawrence's disappearance. Mary Lou found herself going through the motions, her heart heavy with the weight of the future she now faced alone. Eventually, the legal proceedings concluded, and Lawrence Bader was declared legally dead. Mary Lou accepted the reality, but in the quiet moments she couldn't help but wonder if, somehow, he was still out there, lost and waiting to be found. The unanswered questions would haunt her for years to come. Chapter 5. A New Man in Omaha. In the bustling city of Omaha, Nebraska, a man named John Fritz Johnson was establishing a new life for himself, unaware that his past was about to catch up with him in the most unexpected way. Fritz had arrived in Omaha several years earlier, drawn by the promise of a fresh start. Gone were the struggles and pressures of his former existence. In their place, a newfound sense of freedom and opportunity. With a natural charm and an entrepreneurial spirit, he had quickly carved out a niche for himself as a popular bartender at a local establishment. It wasn't long before Fritz's affable personality and knack for mixing the perfect cocktail caught the eye of the owner of a local television station. Recognizing his charisma and quick wit, the station offered him a chance to host a weekly segment, showcasing his bartending skills and engaging in lively banter with the audience. Fritz embraced this new role with enthusiasm, reveling in the attention and adulation of his growing fan base. He became a fixture in Omaha's social scene, making regular appearances at charity events, sporting competitions, and local watering holes. His distinctive eye patch, a remnant of a mysterious past, only added to his allure, sparking endless speculation and rumors among his admirers. As his TV persona blossomed, so too did his personal life. Fritz met and married Nancy, a vibrant and supportive woman who shared his passion for the outdoors and the thrill of competition. Together, they built a comfortable life in Omaha, complete with a cozy home and a shared love for the sport of archery. In the eyes of his adopted city, Fritz Johnson was the embodiment of the American dream. A self-made man who had overcome adversity to achieve success and happiness. Little did he know that his carefully constructed identity was about to be shattered, unearthing a past he had long ago buried. Chapter 6. Rising Star. Fritz Johnson's star continued to rise in Omaha, as his charismatic presence on the local television station captured the hearts of his audience. Each week, his segment showcased his bartending skills, his warm personality, and his knack for engaging in lively conversations with both guests and viewers. Behind the scenes, Fritz honed his craft, experimenting with new cocktail recipes and perfecting his showmanship. He reveled in the attention, basking in the applause and adulation of his growing fan base. The more his popularity grew, the more he embraced the persona of the jovial, quick-witted Fritz Johnson. As his TV career blossomed, Fritz also immersed himself in the local archery community. He had discovered a natural talent for the sport, and his dedication to honing his skills soon earned him a reputation as a formidable competitor. Fritz relished the challenge of the tournaments, the focus and precision required to hit the mark. During his free time, Fritz and his wife Nancy could often be found at the nearby archery range, practicing their form and discussing techniques. The camaraderie of the archery community provided a sense of belonging that had been missing from Fritz's past. Omaha's residents wholeheartedly embraced Fritz as one of their own, captivated by his charm and his genuine enthusiasm for his adopted city. He became a fixture at local events, lending his celebrity status to charitable causes and community initiatives. Fritz's face was everywhere, from billboards to newspaper headlines, cementing his status as a beloved local icon. In the midst of his success, Fritz occasionally found himself reflecting on his past, a vague sense of unease creeping into his otherwise idyllic life. But he quickly pushed those thoughts aside, determined to focus on the bright future that lay before him. The past was where it belonged, buried and forgotten. Little did he know that the carefully constructed facade of his new identity was about to come crashing down, plunging him into a spiral of revelations that would test the limits of his sense of self. Chapter 7. Love and Marriage. As Fritz Johnson's celebrity in Omaha continued to grow, he met and fell in love with a vibrant and supportive woman named Nancy. Their courtship was a whirlwind, filled with shared interests, laughter, and a deep mutual respect. Nancy, a passionate archer herself, was immediately drawn to Fritz's charismatic personality and his impressive skills on the archery range. They spent countless hours together, practicing their form and competing in local tournaments, their bond strengthening with each shared triumph and defeat. Fritz's charm and boundless enthusiasm captivated Nancy, and she marveled at the way he navigated the social scene, effortlessly commanding the attention of those around him. She felt truly seen and appreciated in a way she had never experienced before. As their relationship blossomed, Fritz and Nancy made the decision to take the next step and get married. Their wedding was a joyous affair, with the couple exchanging vows in an intimate ceremony surrounded by their closest friends and family members. In the years that followed, Fritz and Nancy built a comfortable life together in Omaha. They purchased a cozy home filled with mementos of their shared passions, trophies, archery equipment, and framed photographs of their adventures. Fritz continued to thrive in his TV role while Nancy supported him wholeheartedly, often appearing as a guest on his segments. The Johnsons became a fixture in the local community, attending charity events, hosting archery clinics, and engaging with their growing fan base. Fritz relished his role as a public figure, basking in the adulation of his admirers, while Nancy reveled in the fulfillment of their domestic life. For Fritz, his marriage to Nancy represented a new chapter, a chance to leave the past firmly behind and embrace the promise of a bright future. With her by his side, he felt a sense of belonging and purpose that he had never experienced before. Little did he know that this idyllic existence was about to be shattered by the unexpected reemergence of a life he had long ago abandoned. Chapter 8. The Perfect Life. John. Fritz. Johnson's life in Omaha had blossomed into a picture of success and fulfillment. His charismatic presence on the local television station had earned him legions of devoted fans, and his skills as a bartender and archer had cemented his status as a beloved community figure. At home, Fritz's marriage to Nancy was a testament to his newfound happiness. The couple shared a deep love and respect for one another, bonding over their mutual passion for the outdoors and the thrill of competition. Their cozy home was filled with the warmth of their shared interests and the laughter of their vibrant social circle. Fritz relished his role as the host of his weekly TV segment, regaling his audience with witty banter and showcasing his bartending prowess. He had become a household name in Omaha, his face plastered on billboards and his name synonymous with the city's thriving social scene. On the archery range, Fritz's skills continued to impress, and he regularly competed in local and regional tournaments. The focused intensity he exhibited when nocking an arrow and drawing back the bowstring was a stark contrast to the affable charm he exuded in his public persona. In those moments, he was laser-focused, his mind and body in perfect sync as he aimed for the bullseye. As he basked in the adulation of his fans and the support of his wife, Fritz felt a sense of fulfillment that he had never known before. The struggles and uncertainties of his past had been wiped away, replaced by a deep sense of contentment and purpose. Little did he know that this carefully constructed facade was about to come crashing down, as a chance encounter in Chicago would unravel the carefully woven tapestry of his new identity, shattering the illusion of the perfect life he had built. Chapter 9. A Familiar Face. The bustling atmosphere of the annual sporting goods show in Chicago was electric, with exhibitors showcasing the latest innovations in outdoor equipment and eager attendees perusing the aisles. Amid the throng of activity, a man named John Fritz Johnson took the stage, his charismatic presence and archery skills captivating the crowd. As Fritz demonstrated his prowess with the bow and arrow, his every movement oozing confidence and precision, a familiar face in the audience suddenly froze, eyes widening in disbelief. It was a face that hadn't been seen in Akron, Ohio for nearly 8 years, the face of Lawrence Bader. The man, a former resident of Akron, Ohio, had been browsing the archery displays when he caught a glimpse of the man on stage. Something about the way Fritz carried himself, the shape of his face, and the distinct eye patch he wore struck a chord of recognition deep within the man's memory. Pushing through the crowd, the Akron native made his way closer to the demonstration, his eyes never leaving Fritz's face. As the performance ended and Fritz stepped down from the stage, the man approached him, a mixture of uncertainty and disbelief etched on his features. "Excuse me, sir," the man said, his voice wavering slightly. "I don't mean to intrude, but Is your name John Johnson? Fritz turned to face the stranger, his brow furrowed in confusion. Yes, that's right. John Fritz Johnson. Can I help you with something? The man hesitated for a moment, his gaze searching Fritz's face intently. I'm sorry, but you look an awful lot like someone I used to know. Someone from Akron, Ohio. His name was Lawrence Bader. At the mention of that name, Fritz's expression shifted, a flicker of unease crossing his features. He laughed nervously, waving a dismissive hand. I'm afraid you must be mistaken, my friend. My name is Fritz Johnson, and I've lived in Omaha for the past several years. But the Akron native was not to be dissuaded. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized Fritz's face. I'm certain of what I saw. You are the spitting image of Lawrence Bader. He disappeared from Akron back in 1957, and now here you are, alive and well and going by a different name. The color drained from Fritz's face as the man's words sank in. He cast a furtive glance around the crowded convention center, his heart pounding in his chest. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, his voice betraying his growing panic. But the Akron native was not to be deterred. I think you do, he said, his voice firm. I think you know exactly who you are, Lawrence Bader. And I'm going to find out the truth, even if it takes me the rest of my life. With those words, the man turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Fritz Bader staring after him, his world suddenly crashing down around him. Chapter 10. Worlds Colliding. The revelation in Chicago had shaken Fritz Bader to the core, shattering the carefully constructed facade of his new identity. As he hurried back to Omaha, his mind raced with questions and fears, the weight of his past threatening to overwhelm him. Upon returning home, Fritz found his wife Nancy waiting for him, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. Darling, what's wrong? She asked, her brow furrowed. You look like you've seen a ghost. Fritz hesitated, unsure of how to even begin explaining the startling encounter. Nancy, I need to tell you something, he said, his voice trembling. Something I've been hiding for a very long time. Guiding his wife to the couch, Fritz took a deep breath and recounted the events in Chicago, his hands trembling as he spoke. He told her of his true identity as Lawrence Bader, the man who had mysteriously vanished from Akron 8 years earlier, leaving behind a grieving family and a community in shock. Nancy's eyes widened in disbelief, her mind struggling to reconcile the man she had fallen in love with and the revelation he now presented. But how is this possible? She stammered, her voice laced with a mix of emotions. Fritz Bader explained his claim of complete amnesia, how he had woken up on the shores of Lake Erie with no recollection of his past life. He described the fear and desperation that had driven him to reinvent himself, to create a new identity that would allow him to escape the burdens of his former existence. As the reality of the situation sank in, Nancy's expression shifted from shock to a mixture of betrayal and confusion. All this time, you've been living a lie? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Fritz Bader could only nod, his eyes downcast, unable to meet his wife's gaze. I never meant to hurt you, Nancy. I was just trying to survive. The sound of the doorbell pierced the tense silence, and Fritz Bader felt his heart skip a beat. He knew in that moment that his past had finally caught up with him, and his new life was about to come crashing down. Chapter 11. Confrontation. Fritz Bader's trembling hand gripped the doorknob as he steeled himself for the confrontation he knew was about to unfold. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door to reveal the familiar faces of Mary Lou Bader and her 3 children, standing on his doorstep in Omaha. Mary Lou's eyes were red-rimmed from tears, and a mixture of disbelief and anger crossed her features as she took in the man standing before her. Lawrence? She breathed, the name escaping her lips like a prayer. Fritz Bader felt his throat tighten, the weight of his deception pressing down on him. Mary Lou, he began, but the words caught in his throat. Before he could continue, Mary Lou's eldest son stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. You're not our father, he spat, his voice laced with venom. Our father is dead. He drowned in Lake Erie 8 years ago. Fritz Bader flinched at the accusation, his own children peering out from behind their mother, their eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and fear. "I know this is hard to believe, but I am Lawrence Bader," he said, his voice trembling. "I don't know how, but I survived that day on the lake." Mary Lou shook her head, her expression hardening. "No, that's impossible. We mourned you, Lawrence. We buried an empty casket and tried to move on with our lives. You can't just waltz back in and expect us to accept this charade." The youngest Bader child, a boy of 8, stepped forward, his eyes brimming with tears. "Daddy?" he whispered, his voice small and uncertain. Fritz Bader's heart ached at the sight, the innocent plea of his son cutting him to the core. "Yes, son," he said, his own eyes filling with tears. "It's me. I'm here." But before he could say another word, Mary Lou stepped in front of the boy, shielding him. "Don't you dare!" she hissed, her voice laced with raw emotion. "You lost the right to call him that when you disappeared and left us to suffer." The sound of Nancy's footsteps behind him caused Fritz Bader to turn, his expression a mix of guilt and desperation. "Nancy, please, you have to understand. I never meant to hurt anyone. I just wanted a fresh start." Nancy's eyes were filled with a mixture of emotions, hurt, betrayal, and a deep sense of confusion. "A fresh start?" she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. "At the expense of an entire family's grief?" The confrontation raged on, the air thick with the weight of unspoken truths and the shattered dreams of 2 families. Fritz Bader stood, caught in the crossfire, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Chapter 12. The investigation begins. As the shocking revelation of Fritz Bader's true identity spread through the Omaha community and beyond, the media frenzy began. News outlets from across the country descended upon the Johnsons' home, hungry for the latest developments in the unfolding saga. Meanwhile, the legal authorities in both Akron and Omaha were swift to launch their own investigations, determined to uncover the truth behind this baffling case of identity and deception. In Akron, Mary Lou Bader and her children met with detectives, recounting the harrowing events of the day Lawrence Bader had vanished, as well as the agonizing years that followed. They provided any information they could, hoping to piece together the puzzle of what had truly happened to their beloved family member. The Omaha police, on the other hand, focused their efforts on Fritz Bader, subjecting him to a series of intensive interrogations. They sought to verify his claims of complete amnesia, searching for any inconsistencies or signs of deception in his account. Fingerprint analysis and dental records were swiftly compared, confirming beyond a doubt that the man known as John Fritz Johnson was, in fact, the long-lost Lawrence Bader. But the question of how he had managed to disappear and then reappear 8 years later remained a perplexing mystery. Medical and psychological experts were brought in to examine Fritz Bader, delving into the complexities of memory and the rare condition known as dissociative fugue. Their findings were inconclusive, with some suggesting that his amnesia claim was plausible, while others remained highly skeptical. As the investigation progressed, the legal and financial implications of Fritz Bader's reappearance began to unravel. Questions of bigamy, insurance fraud, and the legal status of his new marriage to Nancy in Omaha all came into play, further complicating the already tangled web of this extraordinary case. With the eyes of the nation fixed upon the unfolding events, the Bader and Johnson families found themselves thrust into a maelstrom of media scrutiny and public speculation. The truth, it seemed, had become an elusive prize, buried beneath layers of mystery and conflicting narratives. Chapter 13. Media Circus. The revelation that the beloved Omaha TV personality John Fritz Johnson was actually the long-lost Lawrence Bader from Akron, Ohio, sparked a media frenzy that captivated the nation. News outlets from across the country descended upon the Midwest, eager to uncover every detail of this extraordinary tale of identity and reinvention. Reporters swarmed the Bader and Johnson households, vying for exclusive interviews and insider information. Mary Lou Bader, thrust back into the spotlight, found herself overwhelmed by the constant onslaught of questions and camera crews. Her grief and confusion over her husband's reappearance was on full display, fueling the insatiable appetite of the media. In Omaha, Fritz Bader's wife, Nancy, found herself thrust into the glare of the public eye, her once private life now the subject of intense scrutiny. Reporters probed her for details about her marriage, her knowledge of her husband's past, and the impact of these revelations on their relationship. The Bader children, too, were not spared the media's attention. Cameras and microphones were thrust in their faces as they navigated the turmoil of their father's sudden reappearance. Their once private lives now fodder for news segments and sensational headlines. As the story spread, experts from various fields were called upon to offer their analysis and theories. Psychologists, legal scholars, and even former law enforcement officials weighed in on the plausibility of Fritz Bader's amnesia claim, the viability of his new identity, and the ethical and legal implications of his actions. The public, captivated by the magnitude of the story, fueled the media's frenzy, consuming every new detail and speculation with insatiable curiosity. Social media platforms became a breeding ground for conspiracy theories and armchair investigations, as people from across the country attempted to piece together the puzzle of Lawrence Bader's disappearance and reemergence. Amid the cacophony of voices, the Bader and Johnson families found themselves struggling to maintain their composure, their private lives and deeply personal struggles thrust into the glaring spotlight of public scrutiny. Chapter 14: Crumbling Facades. As the media circus surrounding the Bader-Johnson saga continued to dominate the national headlines, the consequences of Fritz Bader's deception began to unravel his carefully constructed life in Omaha. The television station that had once embraced Fritz as a beloved local celebrity was now faced with a difficult decision. Confronted with the revelation of his true identity and the legal and ethical implications it carried, the station's management had no choice but to terminate his employment. Fritz Bader's sudden dismissal from the TV show he had hosted for years sent shockwaves through the Omaha community. His devoted fans, who had once adored his charming persona and witty banter, now found themselves grappling with a sense of betrayal and disillusionment. With the loss of his high-profile TV job, Fritz Bader's financial stability and public standing began to crumble. The once comfortable life he had built with his wife Nancy was now threatened by the legal and financial fallout of his duplicity. Nancy, herself reeling from the discovery of her husband's true identity, found her own world turned upside down. The woman who had once proudly stood by Fritz's side now found herself questioning the very foundation of their relationship. Had she truly known the man she had fallen in love with? Or was he a complete stranger masquerading as someone else? As the legal authorities continued their investigation, Fritz Bader found himself facing a growing web of legal troubles. Questions of bigamy, insurance fraud, and the validity of his marriage to Nancy were all under scrutiny, adding to the mounting pressure and uncertainty that threatened to consume him. The once thriving archery community that had embraced Fritz Bader as a respected competitor and enthusiast also began to distance themselves from the scandal. His peers, once eager to associate with the charismatic Fritz Johnson, now viewed him with a mix of suspicion and disappointment. Stripped of his public persona, his career, and the support of his adopted community, Fritz Bader found himself increasingly isolated, forced to confront the consequences of the life he had so carefully constructed and the deception he had maintained for so long. Chapter 15: Legal Quagmire. As the shocking revelation of Fritz Bader's true identity reverberated through the Midwest, the legal implications of his actions quickly became the focus of intense scrutiny. Authorities in both Akron and Omaha worked tirelessly to untangle the web of complexities that had been woven over the past 8 years. The first and most pressing issue was the matter of Fritz Bader's marital status. His marriage to Nancy Johnson in Omaha was called into question, as the legal system grappled with the concept of bigamy. Had Fritz Bader's presumed death in 1957 nullified his previous marriage to Mary Lou Bader? Or was his union with Nancy considered invalid due to his deception? Lawyers on both sides argued vehemently, citing precedents and legal loopholes, while the Bader and Johnson families were left in a state of uncertainty, unsure of the ultimate outcome and the ramifications it would have on their lives. Adding to the legal quagmire were the questions surrounding Fritz Bader's insurance claims and the disposition of his estate from 1957. During the years he had been presumed dead, his family had collected life insurance benefits and divided his assets accordingly. Now, with his reappearance, the legality of those transactions was brought into question, opening the door for potential fraud allegations and complicated financial battles. The authorities also delved into the circumstances surrounding Fritz Bader's disappearance and reemergence, searching for any evidence of criminal intent or premeditation. While his claim of complete amnesia remained a point of contention, The investigators sought to uncover the truth behind his sudden transformation from a struggling cookware salesman in Akron to the charismatic TV personality in Omaha. As the legal proceedings unfolded, the Botter and Johnson families found themselves caught in the crosshairs, their personal lives and emotional well-being sacrificed in the pursuit of uncovering the truth. The once clear path forward had become a labyrinth of legal complexities, where the very nature of identity and responsibility were put on trial. Chapter 16. Family Torn Apart. The revelations surrounding Fritz Bader's true identity had left both the Bader and Johnson families reeling, their lives irrevocably altered by the weight of his deception. For Mary Lou Bader and her 3 children, the sudden reappearance of the husband and father they had mourned for 8 long years was a profound and confusing experience. The grief and trauma they had worked so hard to overcome now resurfaced with a vengeance, leaving them grappling with a mix of emotions. The eldest Bader son, who had vehemently rejected Fritz Bader's claims of being their father, refused to acknowledge the man standing before them. The younger children, however, found themselves caught in the middle, their innocent hearts torn between the memory of the father they had lost and the stranger who now sought to reclaim that role. Mary Lou, her own feelings of betrayal and anger warring with a desperate desire to believe that her beloved Lawrence had somehow returned to her, struggled to reconcile the reality of the situation. The life she had carefully rebuilt in his absence now threatened to crumble, leaving her and her children adrift in a sea of uncertainty. In Omaha, Nancy Johnson found herself facing the unimaginable, the realization that the man she had loved and married was not who he claimed to be. The foundations of their relationship, built on a foundation of trust and shared dreams, had been shattered, leaving her questioning everything she thought she knew about her husband. As the legal proceedings surrounding the case intensified, Nancy found herself torn between her loyalty to Fritz Bader and the growing awareness that she had been betrayed. The life they had built together, filled with memories and shared experiences, was now tainted by the revelation of his true identity. Nancy grappled with feelings of anger, betrayal, and deep sorrow. How could the man she had fallen in love with, the one she thought she knew so well, have kept such a monumental secret from her? The realization that her marriage might be considered invalid due to bigamy only added to her turmoil. Caught in the middle of the Bader and Johnson family's emotional upheaval, Nancy found herself increasingly isolated. She could no longer turn to her husband for support, and the Bader family, understandably, viewed her with a mix of suspicion and resentment, blaming her for harboring the man who had abandoned them. The Botter children, too, struggled to reconcile the return of their father with the life they had built in his absence. The eldest son, hardened by years of grief and resentment, refused to acknowledge Fritz Botter's claims, while the younger 2 vacillated between cautious hope and lingering uncertainty. As the families faced off in court, the emotional wounds were laid bare for all to see. Accusations flew, tears were shed, and the once clear lines between right and wrong became hopelessly blurred. The very fabric of their lives, sewn together with the threads of love, loyalty, and trust, was now unraveling at an alarming pace. In the midst of the turmoil, the children found themselves caught in the crossfire, their young minds and hearts unable to fully comprehend the gravity of the situation. They yearned for the father they had lost, but the man who now claimed that title was a stranger, a shadow of the man they had once known and loved. The Bader and Johnson families, once so distinct and separate, now found their fates inextricably intertwined, their lives forever altered by the consequences of one man's decision to disappear and reinvent himself. Chapter 17. The Psychology of Disappearance. As the media firestorm surrounding the Botter-Johnson saga continued to rage, the public and the experts alike became captivated by the psychological aspects of the case. The central question, how could a man seemingly vanish and then reappear years later, claiming complete amnesia, became the subject of intense scrutiny and debate. Psychiatrists, psychologists, and neurologists were called upon to offer their insights, delving into the complex workings of the human mind and the rare conditions that might explain Fritz Bader's extraordinary tale. Some experts pointed to the phenomenon of dissociative fugue, a psychological disorder characterized by sudden, unexpected travel away from one's home, accompanied by a loss of personal identity and the assumption of a new one. They hypothesized that the immense pressure and financial strain Bader had faced in Akron could have triggered such a dissociative episode, causing him to flee and then construct a completely new identity in Omaha. However, other medical professionals remained deeply skeptical of this diagnosis, arguing that Bader's claims of amnesia were simply too convenient and lacked the hallmark symptoms of true dissociative fugue. They suggested that he may have orchestrated his disappearance, deliberately shedding his old identity in favor of the more glamorous, successful persona of John Fritz Johnson. The human mind is an incredible and complex thing, one psychologist stated during a televised interview. But in a case like this, where the stakes are so high and the consequences so profound, we have to be extremely cautious about accepting claims of amnesia at face value. There are simply too many unanswered questions. As the debates raged on, the Bader and Johnson families found themselves caught in the crosshairs, their personal traumas and struggles dissected and scrutinized by a public hungry for answers. The weight of the psychological speculation only added to the emotional turmoil they were already enduring, leaving them feeling exposed and vulnerable. Amid the cacophony of voices, the true nature of Fritz Bader's disappearance and subsequent reemergence remained elusive, a mystery that would continue to perplex both the experts and the public for years to come. Chapter 18. Traces of the Past. As the legal proceedings surrounding the Bader-Johnson case intensified, investigators in both Akron and Omaha delved deeper into the man's past, determined to uncover the truth behind his extraordinary transformation. In Akron, the search for clues surrounding Lawrence Bader's disappearance was carefully revisited, with officers re-interviewing witnesses and combing through the original case files. They pored over the details of that fateful day on Lake Erie, searching for any overlooked evidence that might shed light on what had truly happened to the missing man. The boat rental attendant who had last seen Bader was brought in for additional questioning, his memories of that day scrutinized for any inconsistencies or potential leads. The man, now older and wiser, racked his brain, desperate to recall even the slightest detail that might help solve the mystery. "I remember him being in good spirits that day," the attendant recounted, his brow furrowed in concentration. "He seemed excited to get out on the lake, like he was looking forward to some time alone. But there was something in his eyes, a hint of worry maybe. I just can't put my finger on it." The search of the Lake Erie shoreline was also revisited, with investigators scouring the area for any remnants of Bader's boat or belongings that might have been overlooked in the original search efforts. But the passage of time and the relentless forces of nature had long since erased any tangible evidence that could have provided a clue to his fate. In Omaha, the focus turned to piecing together the timeline of Fritz Johnson's arrival and the subsequent construction of his new identity. Interviews with his acquaintances, colleagues, and neighbors painted a picture of a charismatic, hard-working individual who had seemingly materialized out of nowhere, his past a closely guarded secret. The investigators delved into the records of his employment, his marriage to Nancy, and his involvement in the local archery community, searching for any cracks in the facade that might reveal the truth. But Fritz Bader had been meticulous in his reinvention, leaving behind little in the way of breadcrumbs that could be followed. As the inquiries continued on both fronts, the Bader and Johnson families found themselves caught in a web of uncertainty, their lives forever intertwined by the unraveling of a mystery that had remained buried for far too long. Chapter 19. The Man in the Mirror. As the legal and psychological investigations surrounding the Bader-Johnson case continued, Fritz Bader found himself grappling with the growing weight of his own internal turmoil. The carefully constructed persona he had so meticulously crafted over the years was now crumbling around him, leaving him adrift in a sea of conflicting emotions and self-doubt. In the solitude of his home in Omaha, Fritz Bader would stare into the mirror, his gaze transfixed on the reflection that stared back at him. The eye patch that had once been a symbol of his unique identity now felt like a taunting reminder of the life he had left behind. Who was he, truly? Was he the struggling cookware salesman from Akron, or the charismatic television personality known as John Fritz Johnson? The memories of his past life in Akron had become hazy and fragmented, like a dream slowly fading upon waking. Try as he might, he could not reconcile the man he had been with the man he had become. The nagging sense of guilt and betrayal that plagued him only added to the turmoil, his conscience at war with the desperate need to cling to the new identity he had so carefully cultivated. As the legal proceedings continued, Fritz Bader found himself torn between his desire to reclaim his former life and the fear of the consequences that would surely follow. The Bader family, so long bereft of their loved one, now demanded answers and accountability, while his own Omaha family struggled to come to terms with the truth that had been hidden from them. In his most vulnerable moments, Fritz Bader would sit alone, head in his hands, wrestling with the question that had become a constant companion. Who am I? The man he had once been, the man he had become, and the man he might have been. All of these facets of his identity now seemed to clash and collide, leaving him adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The weight of his choices, the impact they had had on so many lives, began to take a toll on him, both physically and emotionally. As the stress and anguish mounted, Fritz Bader found himself grasping for a sense of purpose, a way to reconcile the fractured pieces of his shattered identity. In the end, the man in the mirror stared back at him, a stranger and a familiar face all at once, a reflection that held the key to the truth he had long been running from. Chapter 20. A Community Divided. As the Bader-Johnson saga unfolded, the reverberations of the revelation rippled through the communities of Akron, Ohio, and Omaha, Nebraska, sowing discord and division among those who had once embraced the men at the center of the storm. In Akron, the news of Lawrence Bader's miraculous return from the grave sent shockwaves through the community. Those who had known the Bader family, who had offered their condolences and support in the aftermath of his disappearance, now found themselves grappling with the weight of their own emotions. Some saw Fritz Bader's reappearance as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a second chance at redemption for a man they had presumed dead. But others, particularly those who had been closest to the Bader family, viewed his deception as an unforgivable betrayal, a betrayal that had robbed them of the chance to truly mourn their lost friend and neighbor. Tensions ran high as the community struggled to reconcile its memories of the Lawrence Bader they had known with the man who now stood before them, claiming to be that very same person. Accusations and recriminations flew, as old friendships were tested and loyalties were called into question. In Omaha, the impact of Fritz Bader's true identity being revealed was no less profound. The local television station that had once lauded him as a beloved celebrity, and the archery community that had embraced him as a skilled competitor, now found themselves in a predicament. Forced to grapple with the ethical and legal implications of his deception, many were compelled to distance themselves from the man they had once enthusiastically supported. The residents of Omaha, who had grown to adore the charismatic Fritz Johnson, found themselves divided in their reactions. Some clung to the memory of the man they had known, refusing to believe the accusations and insisting that his amnesia claim was valid. But others felt betrayed, their trust in their community icon shattered beyond repair. As the legal battle raged on and the media frenzy continued to intensify, the Bader and Johnson families found themselves isolated, not only from each other but from the very communities that had once been their sources of support and belonging. The ripple effects of one man's decision to disappear had spread far and wide, leaving a trail of fractured relationships and unanswered questions in its wake. Chapter 21. A Cruel Twist. As the legal and psychological examinations surrounding the Bader-Johnson case continued, a cruel twist of fate dealt yet another blow to the beleaguered figure at the center of the storm. While navigating the maze of legal complexities and the constant barrage of media scrutiny, Fritz Bader was struck with a devastating diagnosis: aggressive liver cancer. The news, delivered with a grim prognosis, sent shockwaves through both the Bader and Johnson families, plunging them into a new realm of turmoil and uncertainty. For Fritz Bader, the irony of his impending demise was not lost. After having so meticulously constructed a new life for himself, one that had granted him a measure of fame, success, and personal fulfillment, he now found himself facing the stark reality that his days were numbered. The man who had once seemed to have it all, the adoring television audience, the supportive wife, and the accolades of his newfound archery community, now faced the ultimate reckoning, his mortality staring him in the face. As the news spread, the Bader and Johnson families found themselves forced to confront the impending loss, their personal grievances and legal battles momentarily set aside in the face of this devastating development. The animosity that had once divided them began to give way to a fragile empathy, a shared acknowledgement of the fragility of life. Mary Lou Bader, who had spent years mourning the loss of her husband, now found herself thrust back into the role of a caretaker, her heart torn between the bitterness of the past and the compassion of the present. Nancy Johnson, too, grappled with the complexity of her emotions, her loyalty to her husband warring with the hurt and betrayal she had endured. As Fritz Bader's health deteriorated, the legal proceedings were forced to take a back seat, the focus shifting to the more pressing matter of his final days. The families, bound by the weight of their shared experiences, found themselves drawn together in a poignant and bittersweet reunion, their differences momentarily set aside in the face of their shared humanity. The man who had once been known as both Lawrence Bader and John Fritz Johnson now faced the ultimate reckoning, his life and legacy hanging in the balance as the curtain began to close on his extraordinary tale. Chapter 22. Reconciliation Attempts. As Fritz Bader's health continued to decline, the families found themselves caught in a delicate dance of reconciliation and unresolved emotions. Faced with the stark reality of his impending demise, they were compelled to confront the past and the complex web of deception that had torn them apart. In his final days, Fritz Bader made a concerted effort to mend the relationships he had shattered, to offer what meager apologies and explanations he could in the face of his impending mortality. He reached out to Mary Lou Bader, the woman he had once loved and betrayed, his voice trembling with regret and a desperate plea for forgiveness. "Mary Lou," he said, his eyes reflecting the weight of his actions. "I know the pain I've caused you and our children is unforgivable. I can offer no excuses, no justifications. I only hope that in the end you might find it in your heart to understand, to see me, not as the man who abandoned you, but as the man I've always been, even if I've buried him for far too long." Mary Lou listened, her expression a mix of raw emotion and a glimmer of empathy. The years of grief and anger had not been erased, but the sight of this once vibrant man now reduced to a shadow of himself stirred a flicker of compassion within her. With great difficulty, she reached out and took his hand, her own trembling slightly. "Lawrence," she whispered, "I don't know if I can ever truly forgive you. But I see you now, and I know that the man I loved is still there, buried beneath the weight of your choices." The Bader children, too, found themselves grappling with the complexity of their feelings. The eldest son, once so staunchly opposed to acknowledging Fritz Bader's claims, now found the walls of his resentment beginning to crumble. The younger children, still brimming with a childlike hope, reached out tentatively, longing to reconnect with the father they had lost. In Omaha, Nancy Johnson struggled with her own conflicted emotions. The betrayal she had endured was still raw, the foundations of her marriage shaken to the core. Yet as she witnessed Fritz Bader's declining health, she found herself drawn to his side, compelled by a sense of duty and a flicker of the love she had once felt. Together, the families navigated the uncharted waters of this unexpected reunion, their interactions marked by a mix of raw emotion, fragile forgiveness, and a shared acknowledgement of the fragility of life. In the face of mortality, the old wounds began to heal, if only slightly, as they worked to find a semblance of closure in the time they had left. Chapter 23. The Last Bow. As the sun set on the life of Lawrence Joseph Bader, also known as John Fritz Johnson, the Bader and Johnson families gathered together, their differences momentarily set aside in the face of their shared grief. Surrounded by the mementos and symbols of the two identities he had inhabited, Fritz Bader lay in his bed, his once vibrant eyes now dimmed by the ravages of his illness. The eye patch that had once been a distinctive feature of his Omaha persona now rested on the nightstand, a silent testament to the duality that had defined his extraordinary life. One by one, the family members approached his bedside, each bearing the weight of their own complex emotions. Mary Lou Bader, her eyes red from tears, gently reached out and took his hand, the familiar touch igniting a flicker of recognition in his gaze. "Lawrence," she whispered, the name carrying a lifetime of memories and unspoken forgiveness. "It's time to come home." The Bader children, now grown, surrounded their father's bedside, their expressions a mix of sorrow and a tentative acceptance. The eldest son, once so resolute in his rejection, now placed a trembling hand on his father's shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the man he had once been. In Omaha, Nancy Johnson stood beside her husband, her fingers intertwined with his as she fought back the tears that threatened to spill over. The woman who had loved the charismatic Fritz Johnson now faced the sobering reality of bidding farewell to the complicated man who had been her partner in life. "Fritz," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I wish I could have known you, truly known you, from the beginning. But I'm grateful for the time we had, for the joy and laughter we shared." Fritz Bader's eyes fluttered open, his gaze shifting from one family to the other. In those final moments, the distinctions between Lawrence Bader and John Fritz Johnson seemed to blur, as if the two halves of his fractured identity had finally found a way to coexist. With a trembling hand, he reached out, his fingers brushing against the faces of his loved ones, the wife he had taken, the wife he had left behind, and the children whose lives he had irrevocably altered. In that simple gesture, the weight of his choices, the pain he had caused, and the resilience of the human spirit were all laid bare. As the last vestiges of life slipped away, Fritz Bader's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. It was a smile that held the echoes of the man he had been, the man he had become, and the man he had yearned to be. A fleeting moment of peace amidst the storm. The room fell silent, save for the muffled sounds of grief. The Bader and Johnson families, once so bitterly divided, now found themselves united in their shared loss, their eyes reflecting the weight of the extraordinary tale that had been woven and unraveled before them. With Lawrence Joseph Bader's passing, the curtain closed on a life marked by profound duality. A life that had captivated the nation and left an indelible mark on all those who had borne witness to its unfolding. Chapter 24. Legacy of a Double Life. In the aftermath of Lawrence Bader's death, the Bader and Johnson families found themselves grappling with the lasting impact of his extraordinary tale. The man who had once been known as both Lawrence Bader and John Fritz Johnson had left an indelible mark on the lives of those he had touched, both in Akron and Omaha. The legal complexities surrounding his identity and the validity of his marriages continued to be unraveled, with the courts working to bring a sense of closure to the tangled web of deception and reinvention. The questions of bigamy, insurance fraud, and the disposition of his assets were meticulously examined, though the final resolutions were tinged with a sense of unease and ambiguity. For the Bader family, the return of their long-lost patriarch, even in the final months of his life, had been a bittersweet experience. The grief and anger they had harbored for so long had slowly given way to a measure of understanding, as they grappled with the complexities of forgiveness and the nature of identity. Mary Lou Bader, in particular, found herself reflecting on the man she had loved and the man he had become. In the quiet moments, she would sometimes catch herself wondering what might have been, had Lawrence not made the fateful decision to disappear all those years ago. The weight of their shared history and the knowledge that their family had been irrevocably altered would forever linger in her heart. The Bader children, now adults, found themselves revisiting the memories of their father, both the man they had known and the stranger who had returned to them. Some sought solace in the belief that their father's final act of reconciliation was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, while others remained haunted by the unanswered questions and the lingering sense of betrayal. In Omaha, the legacy of John Fritz Johnson continued to reverberate. The television station that had once embraced him as a beloved personality struggled to reconcile his true identity, eventually choosing to honor his memory through a special program that explored the extraordinary story of his life. The archery community, too, found itself grappling with the revelation, their once unwavering admiration for Fritz Johnson tempered by the recognition of the deception that had underscored his success. Yet, in the end, many chose to remember him not for the lies he had told, but for the passion and skill he had exhibited on the range. As the years passed, the Bader-Johnson saga continued to captivate the public's imagination, becoming the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and even a feature film. The enduring mystery of Lawrence Bader's disappearance and his subsequent re-emergence as a different man had struck a chord with audiences, who remained fascinated by the malleability of identity and the human capacity for reinvention. In the end, the legacy of Lawrence Joseph Bader, a man whose life had been defined by duality and the quest for a fresh start, stood as a testament to the complexities of the human experience. His story, a tangled web of loss, deception, and redemption, would continue to resonate, serving as a reminder that the truths we hold dear are often more elusive than they appear. The end.
And there you have it. Story Corner listeners. The incredible tale of Lawrence Bader, the man who vanished and reappeared as someone else entirely. From a struggling salesman in Akron to a beloved TV personality in Omaha, Bader's story challenges our understanding of identity and the human capacity for reinvention. Was it truly a case of dissociative fugue or a carefully orchestrated escape from a life of mounting pressures? The truth, as we've seen, is as elusive as Bader himself once was. What do you think about this extraordinary case? Could you ever imagine starting a completely new life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take on this mind-bending story. If you enjoyed this tale of disappearance and double lives, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the Story Corner. We've got plenty more incredible true stories waiting for you in our playlist. And remember, sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the ones that actually happened. Until next time, this is the Story Corner, where truth is stranger than fiction. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.